The dust of West Texas doesn't just settle on the land, it settles on the soul. For Millie Cartwright, the dust was a constant shroud, a reminder of the two graves on the hill behind her silent home. She was a woman hollowed out by grief, living a half-life on the edge of the frontier. But on a blistering afternoon in 1883, a wagon creaked into her world, carrying a cargo that defied God and man, 5 small children, their heads cruelly bound in burlap sacks. The man driving the wagon offered a devil's bargain, a chance to fill her empty house for the price of a few gold coins. This is the story of that transaction, a desperate act that led not to salvation, but to a terrifying revelation when one of the children whispered a name only the dead should know. The heat was a physical presence. It shimmered over the baked earth of the Cartwright Ranch, distorting the horizon into a wavering line of uncertainty. From her porch rocker, Millie Cartwright watched it, her eyes as dry and empty as the landscape. The rocking chair made no sound. Her late husband Robert had oiled it just a week before the diphtheria took him. That was 2 years ago. 2 years, 1 month, and 6 days since the silence had descended upon her life, a silence broken only by the wind whistling through the eaves and the mournful lowing of cattle she no longer had the heart to care for. Her world had shrunk to this porch, the sterile quiet of the house behind her, and the 2 simple wooden crosses on the rise. Robert and Lily. Her sweet 6-year-old Lily, whose laughter had been the ranch's true sunlight. The sickness had been swift and merciless, stealing her daughter first, then her husband, as he'd tried to nurse the child. Millie had been spared a cruelty she felt every waking moment. The Lord had left her to witness the emptiness. She was contemplating the effort it would take to draw water from the well when she first saw the dust cloud. It was too small for a stagecoach, too deliberate for a lone rider. As it drew closer, it resolved into a rickety buckboard wagon, pulled by a sway-backed mule that looked as exhausted as the land itself. A man held the reins, a silhouette of grim purpose against the blinding sun. Millie stopped rocking. Visitors were rare. Honest visitors rarer still. She felt a familiar knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach, and her hand instinctively went to the place on her hip where Robert's pistol would have been. She had his shotgun, a heavy 10-gauge, resting just inside the door. The wagon groaned to a halt before her porch. The man atop it was wiry and sallow-skinned, with a stained duster and a face that seemed composed of sharp, unpleasant angles. His eyes, small and dark, raked over the ranch with a calculating gaze, assessing its worth, its vulnerability. "Ma'am?" He grunted, his voice a dry rasp. He didn't tip his hat. Mr. Millie replied, her tone flat and unwelcoming. "Name's Kane Riley," he said, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice that sizzled in the dust. "Heard tell out in Fort Griffin you was a widow woman. Livin' alone. The news you hear is your own business. What's yours with me?" Millie's voice was steady, betraying none of the tremor she felt inside. She'd learned to project a hardness she didn't always feel. It was a necessary armor. Riley gave a yellow-toothed smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a purveyor of sorts. I solve problems. And from the looks of this place, you got a problem. A big, quiet one." He gestured with his head toward the back of the wagon. For the first time, Millie noticed the cargo. It wasn't sacks of feed or crates of goods. They were small, slumped figures, 5 of them. And over each of their heads was a rough burlap sack tied at the neck with twine. One of the smaller figures whimpered a muffled, terrified sound that pierced the oppressive heat. Milly's blood ran cold. "What is this? What have you got back there?" that Riley said. His voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Is the solution to your problem, ma'am." "Company." He hopped down from the buckboard, his boots kicking up puffs of ochre dust. He moved to the back of the wagon and untied the flap. "Orphans," he declared, as if presenting prize pigs at a county fair. "Scrapings from the gutters of San Antonio. No ma, no pa, no name, no future. Nothing but a burden on the good tax-paying folk of the world. I transport 'em. Find 'em. Situations." Milly rose from her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the porch rail. "You put sacks on their heads?" The words came out choked with revulsion. "For transport," Riley said dismissively. "Keeps 'em from getting spooked. Less trouble that way. Like putting a hood on a hawk." The comparison made Milly feel sick. These were children, not birds of prey. She could see the outlines of their small bodies, the way they trembled. They weren't livestock. They were human souls, and this man was treating them like chattel. "What do you want from me, Riley?" she demanded. "Simple transaction," he said, stepping closer, his foul breath reaching her. "This ranch is too much for one woman. A house this big needs noise. It needs life. You need help. You need a family. I can provide one. 5 of them. A boy old enough to do chores, 4 others to fill the silence. All for a simple finder's fee. Say, $200 in gold coin. $200. It was a fortune. But she had it. Robert had been a provident man. The money was hidden beneath a floorboard in the bedroom, meant for a future that had died with him and Lily. Milly's mind reeled. The sheer indecency of it was staggering. To buy children. It was a sin, a monstrous perversion of everything she held sacred. Her first instinct was to order him off her land at the point of Robert's shotgun, but then a desperate, traitorous thought wormed its way into her heart. The silence, the god-awful, soul-crushing silence. The empty rooms. The table set for one. The sound of her own breathing as the only proof she was still alive. She thought of the laughter she'd lost, the small hand she could no longer hold. Could she truly send these children away with this monster, back to whatever fate he had in store for them? Another workhouse, a mining camp. Sold off one by one to the highest bidder. "They're children, not cattle," she whispered, her resolve wavering. "They're whatever the person feeding them says they are," Riley retorted. "Right now, they're cargo. You could make 'em family. Give 'em a roof, food, a chance they ain't otherwise gonna get. I'm offering you a kindness, ma'am. A kindness to them, and a kindness to yourself." He saw the conflict in her eyes, and pressed his advantage. "Look, you don't have to decide nothing yet. Just have a look at the merchandise." Before she could protest, he turned back to the wagon, and with a rough tug pulled the sack off the head of the tallest child. A boy of about 12 stared out his eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and defiance. His face was smudged with dirt, and a dark bruise bloomed on his cheek, but his gaze was steady. He looked directly at Milly, a silent plea and a challenge in his eyes. One by one, Riley unveiled them. 2 girls, twins by the look of them, maybe 9 years old, with tangled brown hair and identical frightened expressions. They clung to each other. Then another boy, younger, perhaps 7, with a mop of fiery red hair and a freckled nose. He scowled, his small fists clenched. And then there was the last one, the smallest. A little girl no older than 5 or 6. When the sack came off, she blinked against the sudden harsh light, her pale face streaked with tears. Her hair was the color of straw, and her eyes were a watery forget-me-not blue. She trembled like a newborn foal. Millie's breath hitched in her throat. She looked so fragile, so much like... No. She couldn't let herself think it. She couldn't profane Lily's memory by comparing her to this purchased child. Well, Riley prompted. Good stock, hardy. They'll survive the winter. Millie's heart was a battlefield. Her conscience screamed at her to refuse to uphold the morality Robert had lived by. But the loneliness, a physical ache in her chest, whispered a different counsel. To save them was to save herself. It was a selfish, desperate rationalization, and she knew it. $100, she heard herself say the words, tasting like ash in her mouth, and a signed bill of sale stating, "I am their legal guardian," that you relinquish all claim. Riley's eyes gleamed with avarice. He'd expected to haggle. $150. And the bill of sale is just a formality between us. No need to trouble the law. $150. Millie agreed, her voice hollow. Get them out of the wagon. Give them water. She turned without another word and walked into the cool darkness of the house, her movements stiff and robotic. She went to the bedroom, pried up the loose floorboard, and counted out the gold coins. Each one felt like a stone weighing her down, pulling her toward damnation. She was doing a terrible thing, a necessary thing, a monstrous thing, a merciful thing. She didn't know what it was anymore. When she returned to the porch, the 5 children were huddled together by the water pump, gulping down water from a dipper, as if they hadn't drunk in days. Riley was already composing a crude bill of sale on a piece of foolscap. Millie handed him the pouch of coins without looking at him. He counted it, his greed plain on his face, then signed the paper with a flourish and handed it to her. "Pleasure doing business with you, ma'am," he said, climbing back onto his buckboard. "They're your problem now." He flicked the reins and the wagon creaked away, leaving Millie alone on the porch with the 5 silent, terrified children. The dust settled again. The heat pressed down. But the silence was gone. It had been replaced by the sound of 5 strangers breathing her air. She looked at them, these children she had just bought. The boy, the twins, the red-haired scrapper, and the small, pale girl. They stared back, their faces a mixture of fear, suspicion, and a sliver of hope so fragile it might shatter at a harsh word. Millie's gaze fell upon the locket she always wore around her neck. It was a simple, silver oval. She never opened it. She didn't need to. She knew the 2 tiny portraits inside by heart, Robert and Lily. Her hand went to it, a nervous, protective gesture. The smallest girl's blue eyes, fixed on the locket, her brow furrowed in a flicker of concentration, as if trying to grasp a half-forgotten dream. Her lips parted. And then in a voice no louder than a rustling leaf, a voice that Millie had thought she would never hear again on this earth, the little girl whispered a single word. Lily. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A name. The world stopped. The heat, the dust, the oppressive weight of the sky, it all vanished. Millie Cartwright felt the ground drop out from under her. It wasn't the child's name. It was her child's name. The name on the second cross on the hill. Riley's wagon was a dwindling speck on the horizon. The bill of sale in her hand suddenly felt like a death warrant. This wasn't a bargain to cure loneliness. This was something else entirely. She stared at the small girl whose eyes were still locked on the locket, and a terrifying, impossible question began to form in her mind. She had just bought 5 orphans, but she had a sickening feeling that one of them wasn't an orphan at all. The name hung in the air, an impossible echo. Lily. For a long moment, Millie couldn't breathe. Her mind, a fortress built over 2 years of disciplined grief, crumbled into ruin. She looked from the small blonde girl to the cross on the hill and back again. The world tilted its colors too sharp, its sounds too loud. The eldest boy, seeing the widow's frozen, shocked expression, immediately stepped in front of the little girl, shielding her. "Her name's Rose," he said, his voice firm despite a nervous tremor. "We call her Rose." His protectiveness broke the spell. Millie's senses came rushing back, bringing with them a tidal wave of confusion and a deep, primal fear. "Get inside," she ordered, her voice harsher than she intended. "All of you, into the house, now!" The children flinched at her tone but obeyed, scurrying past her like frightened mice into the unfamiliar shadows of the home. The eldest boy, Thomas, she would later learn, kept a firm hand on the little girl's shoulder, ushering her along, his eyes never leaving Millie. Millie stood alone on the porch, the worthless bill of sale clutched in her hand. Lily. How could this child know that name? A coincidence, a cruel cosmic joke. Children misheard things. Maybe the girl had heard her whisper the name to herself, but Millie was certain she hadn't. The name was a sacred relic she kept locked away in the vault of her heart, too painful to speak aloud. She forced herself to move her legs, feeling like lead. She followed the children inside, closing the door firmly, shutting out the accusing glare of the sun. The main room of the house, once so cavernously empty, now seemed crowded and small. 5 pairs of eyes followed her every move. They were clustered together near the stone fireplace, a small island of shared terror in an ocean of strangeness. "There's stew on the hearth," Millie said, her voice strained, "and bread in the larder. You will wash first. The pump is out back. There's soap." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked past them down the short hall to her bedroom and closed the door. She leaned against the cool wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She sank to the floor, the flimsy bill of sale crushed in her fist. It isn't her. It can't be. Diphtheria left no room for doubt. She had seen it. The fever, the struggle for breath, the grey membrane coating her daughter's throat. She had held Lily's cooling hand. Robert had been the one to handle the burial. He'd insisted. "You've suffered enough, Abby," he'd said, his own face a mask of hollowed-out grief. "Let me do this last thing for our girl. You shouldn't see her put in the ground." She had collapsed, sedated by the town doctor, with a dose of laudanum, and had woken up a widow-in-waiting Robert, having already contracted the fatal sickness himself. He'd died 3 days later. She had trusted him. Of course she had. Robert was the bedrock of her life. But the girl, Rose as the boy called her, saying that name. Millie forced herself to stand. Panic would solve nothing. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was now. What? A guardian, a jailer, a woman who had bought 5 souls and stumbled into a mystery that threatened to unmake her. She splashed her face with water from the basin in her room. Looking in the small silvered mirror, she saw a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes wild. She tucked a stray strand of brown hair back into her severe bun, a small automatic gesture of control in a world that was spinning out of it. She had to be calm. She had to be practical. She had to feed the children. When she returned to the main room, they hadn't moved. The eldest boy, Thomas, stood sentinel. The twins, May and Daisy, held hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The red-headed boy, Finn, was kicking restlessly at a loose floorboard, and the little one, Rose, was peeking out from behind Thomas's legs, her thumb in her mouth. "I am Millie Cartwright," she said, her voice even now. "This is my home. As long as you are under my roof, you will be safe, and you will have food in your bellies. Is that understood?" 4 small heads nodded. Thomas just stared, his expression unreadable. "What are your names?" Millie asked, directing the question to him. "I'm Thomas. These are May and Daisy." He pointed to the twins. "That's Finn." He nudged the redhead with his foot. "And she's Rose." "Rose," Millie repeated, testing the name. It felt foreign, wrong. She looked at the little girl. "Rose? Why did you say that name before the name?" "Lily." Rose shrank further behind Thomas. It was May, the quieter of the twins, who spoke up in a small voice. "Sometimes she says things. Words she heard once. She don't remember much from before." "Before what?" Millie pressed. "Before Kane Riley." Thomas said, his voice hard. "Before all this." The stew was thick with salt pork and beans. Millie ladled it into 5 bowls she hadn't used in 2 years. She watched them eat. They ate like starving wolves, hunched over their bowls, eyes darting up at her between spoonfuls as if expecting her to snatch the food away. There were no manners, no conversation, just the scraping of spoons and the sound of swallowing. The sight should have filled her with some measure of satisfaction. She had saved them from hunger. But all she felt was a profound and unsettling anxiety. After the meal, she laid out bedrolls she'd retrieved from the attic. "You'll sleep here by the hearth," she instructed. "The fire will keep you warm." As the children settled down, a fragile truce seemed to form. The warmth of the fire and the food in their bellies began to melt some of their fear. Finn, the fiery one, was the first to fall asleep, his scowl relaxing into the innocent face of a child. The twins curled up together, a tangle of limbs and hair. Thomas stayed awake the longest, his eyes tracking Millie as she moved about the room, tidying up, checking the locks. He was a self-appointed guardian, and his charge was not just Rose, but all of them. Millie respected his grit, even as it unnerved her. Finally, only Rose was left awake. She was sitting up in her bedroll, her small face illuminated by the firelight. She was staring at Millie's locket again. Millie's heart gave a painful lurch. Taking a deep breath, she walked over and sat on the floor a few feet from the child's bedroll. "Are you warm enough, Rose?" she asked, her voice softer now. The girl nodded, her blue eyes wide and luminous. "Can you tell me about the before time?" Millie asked gently. "Before the man in the wagon?" Rose shook her head slowly. "It's fuzzy, like a dream when you wake up. What do you remember?" The little girl frowned in concentration. "A bumpy wagon, a lady with a cough. She sang a song." "What song?" Rose hummed a few notes, a simple meandering tune. It was the lullaby Millie had made up for Lily, a little song about a firefly and the moon, a song no one else in the world knew. Milly felt the air leave her lungs. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. The lady who sang, Milly said, her voice a strained whisper. What did she call you? Rose's eyes clouded over. Don't remember. My head hurt. I was hot. She touched her forehead. She gave me away, to a man with a beard, for medicine. A man with a beard. Robert. And then Cain Riley. Rose nodded, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. He put the sack on. Milly reached out her hand, trembling, and gently brushed the tear from the girl's face. The skin was soft, familiar. She looked at the girl's hairline, at the small, crescent-shaped scar just above her right eyebrow. Lily had gotten that scar when she was 4, tumbling off the porch steps while chasing a chicken. It was her. The realization didn't come in a flash of joyous light. It came as a cold, sickening dread. It was her daughter, her living, breathing daughter, whom she had mourned for 2 years. Her Lily sold to her on her own porch like a stray calf for $150. And if this was Lily, then Robert, her good, honest Robert, had lied. He had looked her in the eye while their child was dying, and he had lied. He had let her believe their daughter was dead and buried on the hill. He had constructed an elaborate, monstrous deception, and then had the convenience of dying before she could ever uncover it. Why? The question screamed in her mind. Why would he do such a thing? To spare her pain. What pain could be worse than this? Believing your child dead was an agony. Discovering you'd been betrayed by the man you loved, that your child had been alive, suffering, lost to you all this time. That was a torment beyond the reckoning of hell. She looked at the sleeping children. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. She was now responsible for all of them. Thomas with his fierce loyalty. May and Daisy, the inseparable twins. Finn, the little firebrand. They were hers now, bound to her by a piece of paper and a pouch of gold. Her quest for the truth had to be cloaked in secrecy. Cain Riley was still out there, and if he ever suspected the true identity of the little girl he'd sold so cheaply, he would surely be back. And then there was the town. Sheriff Brody was a decent man, but he was a stickler for the law. How could she explain any of this? Good morning, Sheriff. I seem to have purchased my own long-dead daughter from a child trafficker. She would be branded a lunatic, and the children would be taken from her, sent to a state orphanage, far worse than anything they'd yet endured. That night, Milly Cartwright did not sleep. She sat in the rocking chair on the porch, the now loaded shotgun across her lap, and watched the stars. The silence she had once hated now seemed like a luxury. It had been replaced by the soft breathing of 5 children and the deafening roar of a world turned upside down. She was no longer just a widow. She was a mother again. And she was a woman with a terrible secret to keep and a devastating truth to unravel. The ghost on the hill wasn't her daughter. The ghost was her husband. And he had a great deal to answer for. The days that followed were a strange dance of domesticity and dread. On the surface, life at the Cartwright Ranch fell into a rhythm. Milly taught the children chores, not as a taskmaster, but as a woman rediscovering purpose. Thomas, once he realized that food was plentiful and blows were absent, proved to be a capable and intelligent helper. He learned to mend fences and tend to the small vegetable garden with a quiet competence that belied his years. Finn's boundless energy was channeled into chopping kindling and chasing off Crow's tasks he performed with a wild, chaotic glee. The twins, May and Daisy, took to the kitchen. May was meticulous, carefully measuring flour and polishing the silverware, while Daisy, more frail and prone to coughing fits, would sit and knead dough, her small hands growing stronger each day. And then there was Rose, or Lily. Milly found herself caught between the two names, the two identities. To the other children, she was Rose, their little sister in hardship. But to Milly, every time she looked at the girl, she saw Lily. She saw it in the way she tilted her head when listening in the gap between her two front teeth, in the fierce, stubborn set of her jaw, when she didn't get her way. Milly's nights were spent in a feverish search. After the children were asleep, she would light a single lantern and turn the house inside out. She was looking for a clue, a confession, a reason. She searched Robert's roll-top desk, sifting through old ledgers and receipts. She went through his trunk of army memorabilia from his time as a Union scout. Nothing. It was as if he had scrubbed his life clean of this one monumental secret. Her interactions with Lily were fraught with a painful tenderness. She couldn't openly embrace her as the daughter she'd lost without terrifying the child and alerting the others. So she showed her love in small, stolen moments. An extra piece of molasses cake, a gentle hand smoothing her hair, reading to her from one of Lily's old picture books, her voice thick with unshed tears as the little girl leaned against her, smelling of soap and sunshine instead of sackcloth and fear. The town of Redemption Gulch was a necessary evil. Milly needed supplies, and her sudden acquisition of 5 children had not gone unnoticed. Her first trip into town with Thomas and May was an ordeal. Eyes followed them everywhere. Whispers trailed in their wake like smoke. 5 of them, can you believe it? Bought 'em, I heard, from some peddler. Poor woman's gone mad with grief. She held her head high, her expression a mask of indifference, as she conducted her business at the general store. The proprietor, a stout man named Mr. Peterson, couldn't contain his curiosity. "Quite the handful you've got there, Milly," he said, weighing a sack of beans. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mr. Peterson," she replied coolly, handing him the coins. The phrase tasted like hypocrisy. The biggest hurdle was Sheriff Brody. He was a tall, weary man with a drooping mustache and eyes that had seen too much trouble. He caught up with her as she was loading her wagon. "Milly," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need a word." He led her away from the children to the side of the sheriff's office. "Folks are talking," he began, "about these children. A man named Riley passed through a week back, bragging in the saloon about how he'd unloaded some orphans on the grieving widow Cartwright. I don't like the sound of it. There are legal channels for adoption, papers to be filed with the territory." Milly's heart pounded. "They had nowhere to go, Sheriff. He would have left them for dead. Was I supposed to turn them away?" "No," Brody admitted, sighing. "No, a good Christian woman wouldn't, but this ain't right. It's irregular. For your own protection, and for theirs, we need to make this official. I'll need to send a wire to the territorial judge in Austin." "Give me time, Sheriff." Milly pleaded, her mind racing. An official inquiry would be a disaster. They would question the children. Lily's story would come out. They're still settling. They're terrified. Let them find their feet. Let me be a mother to them for a little while before the law starts tearing us apart. Brody looked at her, his gaze softening slightly as he saw the desperation in her eyes. He had known Robert. He had been at both funerals. "All right, Milly. A little while. But I'm watching. And if I get so much as a whisper of trouble from that ranch, I'll be out there myself. You understand?" "I understand," she said. relief washing over her. She had bought a little more time. The breakthrough came 2 weeks after the children's arrival on a storm-racked night when thunder rattled the windows and rain lashed against the roof. Daisy's cough had worsened a deep barking sound that worried Milly. While searching for an old jar of goose grease in the back of the dusty linen closet, her hand brushed against a loose board at the very bottom. Her fingers trembled as she worked it free. Beneath it was a small tin box. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled amongst some dried flowers, was a leather-bound journal and a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. It was Robert's journal, not the one he kept for ranch business, but a private one. His handwriting so familiar it made her ache filled the pages. With the storm raging outside and the children sleeping fitfully, Milly sat at the kitchen table and began to read. The truth, when it came, was more painful and complex than she could ever have imagined. The journal entries began the day Lily fell ill, October 12th, 1881. The doctor confirmed it. Diphtheria. My sweet Lily. Her breath is a struggle. Abby is a pillar of strength, but I see the terror in her eyes. The same terror that lives in my heart. The entries chronicled the disease's brutal progression. Then came the entry that changed everything. October 17th, 1881. She is fading. The membrane is closing her throat. Dr. Miller says there is no hope. He says God's will be done. But I saw a wagon today. A family heading west to California, the Pearsons. Their own child died of fever last month. The woman, Mrs. Pearson, was a nurse during the war. She looked at Lily. She said, there is a treatment, a tracheotomy, a desperate chance. Dr. Miller calls it butchery. But she says she has seen it work. She says Lily has a flicker of a chance, but we must be quick. Abby cannot take any more. If we try this and fail to see her daughter cut open, it will destroy her. If Lily dies here in this house, Abby will die with her. I see it in her eyes. She is already a ghost. So I have made a terrible choice. A choice born of love and desperation. Tonight I will tell Abby that our Lily has passed in her sleep. I will give her laudanum for the grief. While she is lost to the world, I will take Lily to the Pearsons. I have given them every cent we have, our emergency funds, the deed to the north pasture. They will perform the surgery, and if she lives, they will take her with them to California. They will raise her as their own. They will write to me at a post box in Fort Griffin. It is a monstrous lie. I am damning my own soul. But I am doing it to save my wife. To lose a child is a sorrow a person can in time endure. To lose a child and a wife is more than I can bear. I will bury an empty coffin, and I will live with this lie until my dying day. May God forgive me. Milly dropped the journal. The room spun. The letters were from Mrs. Pearson. The first from a town in New Mexico was triumphant. She lives? The fever broke. The scar will be small. We have named her Rose. She is a gift from God. The second letter, 6 months later, was desperate. Mr. Pearson had been killed in a mining accident. She was alone, penniless, and sick herself. The last letter was almost illegible, the handwriting shaky. It was from a workhouse in San Antonio. I am dying. I cannot care for her. I have to give her over to the state. Forgive me. I tried. The timeline snapped into place with horrifying clarity. Robert had died before he could ever receive that last desperate letter. He had died believing Lily was safe, being raised by a loving family in California. He had died a liar, but in his own mind, he was a savior. And Lily, Rose, had been swallowed by the brutal, uncaring system, eventually falling into the clutches of a man like Kane Riley, who saw her only as merchandise. Millie didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot of fury and heartbreak in her chest. Fury at Robert for his arrogant, misguided deception. Fury at the cruel fate that had stolen her daughter twice. Heartbreak for the suffering her child had endured, while she, Millie, had been tending an empty grave. She looked at the sleeping children. Her purpose was now diamond sharp. She had to protect them, all of them. This ramshackle group of strays was her family, now forged in trauma and secrets, and she had to erase the past. The next morning, under a sky washed clean by the storm, Millie did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She took a shovel and walked up the hill. With methodical, grim determination, she dug up the small grave next to Robert's. It was empty. Just dark, packed earth. There was no coffin, no body, nothing. She filled the hole back in, patted the earth smooth, and pulled the simple wooden cross from the ground. She carried it back to the house, broke it over her knee, and fed the pieces into the kitchen stove. As the wood burned, she felt not closure, but a hardening of her will. The lie was buried. The ghost was exorcised. Now she had to face the living threats. And she had a terrible feeling that Kane Riley, the man who'd set this all in motion, was not the kind of man who concluded a piece of business so easily. The first sign of trouble came not as a thunderclap, but as a shadow on the horizon. A week after Millie had burned the cross, Thomas rode in from checking the southern fence line, his face pale with alarm. "There's a man!" He panted, sliding off the old mare, watching the house from the ridge. "Been there an hour. It's him. It's Kane Riley." Millie's blood went cold. She had known this day would come. A man like Riley, driven by greed, would not be able to resist circling back. He must have heard whispers in some saloon, pieced together rumors of the lonely widow with a hidden fortune. Or perhaps in his vile mind, he simply saw her as an easy mark for further extortion. "Get the children inside," she ordered, Thomas, her voice low and urgent. "All of them. In the root cellar. Stay there and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." "Do you understand me, Thomas?" The boy's eyes were wide, but he nodded, his jaw set. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end this," Millie said. She went into the house and took down Robert's 10-gauge shotgun. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. She broke it open, checked the shells, and snapped it shut with a definitive click. She sent the children scrambling into the dark, earthy-smelling cellar beneath the kitchen floor, placing a heavy rug over the trapdoor. "May, you're in charge of keeping Daisy calm. Finn, you stay quiet, or so help me. Thomas, you guard this door with your life. Do not open it until I tell you to." Then she walked out onto the porch and sat in her rocking chair, the shotgun laid across her lap, its twin barrels glinting in the afternoon sun. She didn't have to wait long. Kane Riley rode up not on his rickety buckboard, but on a lean black horse, a pistol strapped to his hip. He looked more dangerous now, less like a pathetic scavenger, and more like a predator who had caught a promising scent. He pulled up 20 yards from the porch, his eyes flicking from the shotgun to Millie's face. "Well now, ma'am," he said, a greasy smile spreading across his lips. "That's no way to greet an old business partner." Our business is concluded, Riley. Milly said, her voice as cold and hard as the steel of the gun. You're trespassing. Am I? He mused, stroking his chin. I've been hearing things. That you came into some money after your husband passed. That you keep it tucked away. Seems to me my finder's fee was a little on the light side. I delivered you a fine family. A fine, healthy family. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Especially that little blonde one. Rose. There's something special about that one, ain't there? Milly's heart leaped into her throat, but her expression remained like stone. They're just children. My children. And you will not get another cent from me. Riley laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, I think I will. See, I also heard another story. A sad story about your own little girl, Lily, dying a few years back. Funny thing, a man I talked to from San Antonio remembered a little blonde girl named Lily being processed out of a workhouse right before I acquired her. Said her mother, some sick woman named Pearson, had died. He knew. Maybe he didn't know the whole truth, but he knew enough. He knew the child's original name. He had connected the dots. The little girl wasn't just a random orphan. She was Millie Cartwright's daughter, and that made her infinitely more valuable. That's a $500 child, ma'am, Riley said, his voice dropping. Maybe 1,000. A child returned from the dead. You'll pay it, or I'll ride into Redemption Gulch and tell Sheriff Brody the whole fascinating story. How you bought a child that looks just like your dead daughter. How you're living out here in a fantasy. He'll take 'em all away from you, Millie. He'll put 'em in a state home so foul it'll make my wagon look like a palace, and your precious Lily will be lost to you all over again. Forever. It was a perfect trap. He had her, and he knew it. He could ruin everything. Get off my land, Milly said, her voice shaking with a rage so profound it almost blinded her. Not without my money, Riley sneered, his hand moving casually toward the butt of his pistol. Now you can do this easy, or you can do this hard. What happened next was a blur of calculated chaos. From the corner of her eye, Milly saw movement. The barn door 50 yards to the left was creaking open. Finn. The little fool must have slipped out before Thomas could stop him. He was holding a slingshot. At the same time, Riley, seeing her distracted, decided to make his move. He spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol. No! Milly screamed, leveling the shotgun. A small rock, expertly flung from Finn's slingshot, zipped through the air and struck Riley's horse squarely on the flank. The animal shrieked and reared violently. Riley, caught off guard, fired his pistol into the air as he fought to stay in the saddle. That single gunshot was the signal. Suddenly, the front door of the house burst open. It wasn't Milly. It was Thomas, a heavy cast-iron skillet in his hands. He must have unbarred the door from the inside and sent the others to the cellar. He charged off the porch with a guttural yell, a boy playing the part of a man to defend his family. Riley, thrown from his horse and landing hard, scrambled to his feet, enraged. He saw Thomas coming and raised his pistol. Milly didn't hesitate. She fired the right barrel of the shotgun. The blast roared across the yard, not aimed at Riley, but at the ground just in front of him. Dirt and gravel exploded into his face, blinding him, making him scream in pain and shock. He stumbled back, clawing at his eyes, his pistol falling from his grasp. It was the opening they needed. "Now, May," Thomas yelled. From the side of the house where she'd been hiding quiet, May appeared. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding the ranch's dinner bell, a heavy brass instrument, and she began ringing it with all her might. Clang, 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 clang. It was the emergency signal, the call for help known to every rancher in the territory. Riley, momentarily blinded and deafened by the bell, was completely disoriented. He staggered around, cursing, trying to find his pistol in the dust. Millie stood up from the rocking chair, the second barrel of the shotgun, still loaded, its dark eye aimed directly at Riley's chest. "It's over, Riley," she said, her voice ringing with an authority she never knew she possessed. It was at that moment that two riders appeared over the rise, drawn by the gunshot and the frantic ringing of the bell. It was Sheriff Brody and his deputy. They reined in, taking in the scene in an instant. Millie, a shotgun in her hands, looking like an avenging angel. Riley on his knees, howling and covered in dirt. Thomas standing guard with a skillet. Finn with his slingshot. And May still ringing the bell for all she was worth. "What in God's name is going on here, Millie?" Brody demanded, his hand on his gun. "This man," Millie said, her voice clear and steady, never taking her eyes off Riley, "is Kane Riley. He is a trafficker of children. He sold me these children, and he came back today to extort more money from me, threatening to harm them and spread lies about me in town if I didn't pay. He drew his weapon on me. You can see it there in the dust." Riley, hearing the sheriff, began to whine. "She's lying. She's a crazy woman. She tried to kill me. He's the liar," Thomas shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "He threatened our ma. He was gonna shoot her." Brody dismounted, his eyes hard. He looked at Riley, then at Millie, then at the determined faces of the children arrayed around her. He saw a frightened, desperate man and a woman standing her ground, surrounded by a loyal pack of misfits who called her Ma. He picked up Riley's pistol from the dust. It had been fired. "Riley," Brody said, his voice grim, "I warned you about trouble. It seems you've found it. You're under arrest for extortion assault, and I suspect a half-dozen other things once we start digging." As the deputy cuffed a protesting, weeping Kane, Riley Millie finally lowered the shotgun, her arms trembling from the strain. The children rushed to her, clinging to her skirt, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Thomas stood beside her, his head held high. Lily, no rose, peered out from behind Millie's legs, her eyes fixed on the man being led away. Sheriff Brody walked over to her. He looked at the 5 children huddled around her, then at her resolute face. He remembered the hollowed-out woman she had been. He saw the fierce mother she had become. He knew there was more to this story. Secrets buried deeper than an empty grave, but he also knew that some truths were better left undisturbed. "You said you needed time to be a mother to them," Brody said, his voice softer now. "Looks to me like you're doing a fine job of it." He nodded toward the children. "We'll still need to file some papers, make it official, but I don't expect any trouble from the judge. Not after this." He tipped his hat, a gesture of respect he hadn't offered before, and led Kane Riley away. Millie Cartwright stood in her yard, surrounded by her children, and watched him go. The dust settled once more. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The house behind her was no longer silent or empty. It was a home. It was a fortress. She looked down at the small blonde girl clutching her hand. Their eyes met. There were no more words needed. The secrets of the past were just that, past. The future was here in the fierce loyalty of a boy with a skillet, the courage of a girl with a bell, the wild spirit of a boy with a slingshot, and the quiet strength of 5 children who had been lost, and now, against all odds, were found. She was no longer Millie Cartwright, the lonely widow. She was Ma, and she was finally home. And so on the unforgiving frontier of West Texas, a family was not born but forged, forged in the crucible of secrets, lies, and a love so fierce it could stare down the barrel of a gun. Millie Cartwright set out to buy a cure for loneliness, and instead found a reason to live, a reason to fight. She and her 5 children. Thomas May Daisy Finn and the girl the world would know as Rose were a testament to the fact that family isn't just about the blood you share, but about the blood you'd be willing to spill for one another. Their story is one of thousands buried in the dust of the Old West, a reminder that the greatest legends aren't always about gunslingers and gold, but about the quiet, unyielding power of a mother's love. If this story of resilience and redemption touched your heart, please help us keep these forgotten histories alive. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales from the heart of the American West. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Millie's place?